or good morning if you are watching us from the States. Thank you for joining us today. This is Inside Art Live, the online interview series of the art industry conference called Inside Art that we organize annually during Art Market Budapest, Central and Eastern Europe's leading contemporary art fair. My name is Christina Löbel, and I will be your host today. I am honored to welcome and introduce Alex Nyerges, Director of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, Virginia. The museum is among the top 10 comprehensive art museums in the USA, and Alex is a good friend and a regular visitor at Art Market Budapest. Besides leading such a prominent institution, Alex is an expert in photography who not only curated great exhibitions, but also is an acknowledged photographer himself. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
Hello. You've joined us from home, if I am correct. How are you getting on? What is the COVID situation in the US and specifically in Virginia right now?
Well, in Virginia, we're actually very fortunate that we're not one of the current hotspots. But as I think everyone knows, America has done a terrible job in fighting the COVID virus, putting the right restrictions on, and for doing all of the smart things that so many other countries have done. And as a result, so many parts of the U.S. are in terrible shape. And but we're lucky. Richmond has very few cases, very few deaths, and the same is true across Virginia.
Oh, that's very good news, and we keep our fingers crossed for you. Also, the museum has recently reopened, if I'm correct. What do you experience? Are people eager to return, or are they still scared away?
Well, it's a little of both. We are seeing only about 35% of what we would normally see during a summertime when we have a major blockbuster exhibition. We have a huge show of ancient Egyptian art from the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, but it's only about 35%. Interestingly enough, if you look at all of the major art museums in the United States, same challenge, 25 to 35% is what everybody's seeing.
So that's difficult. We will come back to the issue of pandemic because it's very interesting and how it affects the VMFA museum and the art world in general. But my guess is that our audience would love to know a little more about the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts itself. It is one of the leading regional museums in the US. By European standards, given your collection and the geographical range of your visitors, you would probably in the League of National Museums in Europe. How would you introduce VMFA to the European audience?
Well, we're one of the 10 largest comprehensive art museums in America. So in the same, not quite obviously as big as the Metropolitan or Chicago, but much more like Philadelphia, Los Angeles, those institutions. We're very large. We encompass some 14 acres on our campus. We have about 2/3 of a million square feet, 50,000 objects. But what sets us apart from everybody else is that we are the only art museum in the United States that's open with free general admission 365 days a year. We never close.
Oh, okay. That's really something special. In what ways does a museum like yours in the USA different from a national museums in Europe? I'm sure you have lots of experience in Europe as well. And how would you position yourself in comparison to a national museum in the USA? So just to make it a little landmarkish to understand.
Well, the best way to think about us in terms of how different we are, ours is a comprehensive art museum, much like the museums in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles and Houston. And as a comprehensive museum, our collections span 6,000 years of humankind history, as well as the entire globe. So we have the largest collection of Fabergé outside of Russia. We have a magnificent collection of French Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, paintings and sculpture, one of the largest collections of works by Edgar Degas. We have the best collection of English silver in North America. And then our American collections and our contemporary and modern collections are in the top half dozen in North America.
I'm just want to show you the audience a little picture of the museum. It's beautiful, actually, from the outside. I will not be able to give you a guided tour, unfortunately, but I do persuade everybody to go to VMFA website and check out the museum collection. Talking about the collection itself, you have as you mentioned, and as we went through it, you have an exemplary collection. How did it develop, and where did they originate from, and how has it grown in the past 85 years? I guess this is the number.
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, we were the first art museum in America created by a state. The Commonwealth of Virginia, through its General Assembly, created us. We're a state agency still today, part of the government. But about 80% of our funding comes from private sources, revenues, contributions, and our foundation, which houses our endowment. And so, we've grown from no collection in 1934 when we were founded to more than 50,000 objects today. And as I mentioned, the stellar collections a moment ago, but also, for example, African American art. We aspire to be one of the 3 best collections of African American art in the world, and we're well on the way to that. We've just added a new department to our curatorial ranks. We have 8 curatorial departments, and added photography as a new discipline separate from South Asian, East Asian, pre-Columbian and Native American, and so on.
Okay. Your collection has, you mentioned as highlights of the collection, photography and African American art as well. But your collection has lots of European artworks as well. I think this is also special in America. How do Americans relate to European art nowadays?
Well, very much so, because a good portion of Richmond and Virginia itself and the country has come from Europe somewhere, and our collections are fairly expansive. I mean, we have fabulous collections of Baroque painting, obviously heavily into Italian, but also Dutch and Flemish. Our collections of French art are extraordinary, ranging from the medieval to the 20th century. And then our collections in terms of contemporary art are very global, Gerhard Richter and others that are all represented here at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts.
Mm-hmm. Does that count special in America for a regional museum like you to have such a vast European and contemporary collection?
Well, we're very much modeled after the encyclopedic style museums, the Metropolitan, the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, Philadelphia. So our collections are not dissimilar than those. Ours are much newer. The Metropolitan opened in 1870, and we did open for another 66 years.
Okay, that's very special. In generally speaking, if you had to sum up, what is the role of an art museum today, especially your museum, or in generally speaking? And it's absolutely not in terms of pandemic, this pandemic story, because we'll talk about it a little later. But in general, what does an art museum stand for in the 21st century, according to you?
Well, it's a couple of things. It's a great question, too, because first of all and foremost, we're an educational institution. We're about formal and informal education. Visitors who come to see special exhibitions, come to visit the permanent collections, to read the books that we publish. And we published a good handful, half a dozen or more books a year on various subjects. So we are about formal and informal scholarship. But in addition to that, we are a gathering spot. We're a center for the community here in Richmond and for Virginia. We're a place where people can come to find solace and peace and beauty and inspiration. And we need all the inspiration we can get in the world today.
Sure we do. So that means that the role of an art museum is quickly not quickly, but changing in a way for not only displaying art and also education, but to provide a community area for people to gather and to relax, if I get it well.
Well, very much so. And I'll just use one illustration, our permanent collection, which, people sometimes think is fairly static. We have about 5,000 works of art on display at any point in time. In every year, we change about 1/5, about 1,000 works of art come off of display and are replaced with other works of art. A good example is our French Art Nouveau collections, furniture, silver, ceramics, and the other decorative arts. And we have vast collections. In fact, other than the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, our collection of French Art Nouveau is the finest in the world. So rather than having everything out, we change things. So one can always experience something new, even in the so-called permanent collection galleries, because they're only permanent in the sense that we own the art here at the museum.
That sounds good. Let's talk a little about photography, especially Hungarian photography. We at Budapest established a photography fair, as you know well, called Art Photo Budapest, which is sort of part of Art Market Budapest. And we based it on strong Hungarian photography traditions. I believe that you share this view because you have a significant number of photographic works by the 20th century Hungarian photo artists, or artists at least of Hungarian origins, later becoming American, such as André Kertész, György Kepes, Kornél Kapa, Brassai, and I could go on forever. These Hungarian-born photographers are well known and praised internationally. Since you are a photography lover and also happen to be half Hungarian from your father's side, I guess this is the perfect choice to ask you, what may be the secret to their success, or what was the secret to their success? And according to you, what is special about these artists? Can you trace any typical Hungarian or Central European notes in their works?
Well, I love the question because I'm working on a major exhibition, which will come to Hungary at the Museum of Fine Arts in Budapest. We'll be here at the Virginia Museum. It will also travel to other museums in this country where there are great art museums with photography, but also significant populations of Hungarian American people. But I'm going to quote Robert Capa, whose original, when he was born, was not Capa. He changed his name in 1936. But Robert Capa, who is the most famous and best known war photographer in history, was also famous for a quote, which I think is quite beautiful, and that is, "It's not enough to be talented to be a great photographer, but you also have to be Hungarian."
Yeah, that's a very famous quote indeed.
And it's true, because in this exhibition, we're bringing together 35, 36 photographers, and I have a co-curator, in fact, the world expert in Hungarian photography and Hungarian American photography, Karoli Kincses, in Budapest, and I've been working on this together for a number of years. And we're going to bring together 36 photographers born and raised in Hungary, but then who emigrate to America. But they've mostly gone unknown. So other than Kepes and Kappa, Kertész, most of them are not even most people don't realize, including photo historians, that they're all Hungarian. And so this will be a seminal exhibition because it's going to open the eyes to art historians around the world, but also bring pride to Hungary, because there was something in the water in the 19th and 20th centuries when these photographers were born and raised that made them different. And one of the theories is that the Hungarian language is so difficult is that when they traveled away from Hungary, the camera was their universal translator, was the way that they could speak and converse with the world around them. And that it's an interesting theory, but people are going to be startled at the exhibition. These photographers, some of whom are only known by photo historians, but need to be better known overall. But they share one thing: they were born in Hungary, and then they came and lived in America.
So we are really looking forward to this exhibition. When do you think it would travel to Hungary?
2023. Laszlo Ban and I met last fall. We were going to meet again this spring, but obviously since March the 13th, everything has changed in terms of travel. Where I normally am on a plane every other week, I haven't actually been in the air since March the 7th, and at the moment don't have any plans to go anywhere, primarily because the COVID virus is so difficult in this country, but also the travel bans from Europe and China about Americans traveling there, which is highly unfortunate. We do a lot of work with China, the National Museum of China, the Palace Museum, the Forbidden City, are partners of ours. We have long-term operating agreements to work together, but we can't execute any of those for the time being. But 2023, and then it'll tour the United States as well.
Okay, we do keep our finger crossed. We really want to see that exhibition very soon.
Oh.
Okay, let's go back a little to the challenges of the pandemic, because it is here and now, unfortunately. You already mentioned that people are a little afraid to visit the museum, despite the fact that it is open, that it is safe, that you keep all the regulations, but still, I guess they are a little afraid of socializing now. But what do you anticipate on the long run? Will we return to all what used to be normal a couple of months ago? What do you think?
I think it's going to take some time, first of all, and until there's a vaccine against the coronavirus, the COVID-19, I don't think people are going to be comfortable coming back in the numbers that we had before. You know, a typical Friday evening at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, for example, in the summertime, we have a Friday party that spills out into our sculpture garden, which is right outside the museum, and we'll have a couple of thousand, 2,000 or 3,000 people coming for tours and lectures. We have food and beverage set up in the gardens, in our cafe. The restaurant upstairs, which is a fabulous place to eat, is packed. But that's not happening now. We're doing virtual tours. We're doing virtual online performances. Every Thursday, we offer live free jazz in the Best Cafe. Right now, we're doing live free jazz virtually through our website and YouTube. So until we find a vaccine, we can't get back to normal. People are just afraid of everything. And I'm working obviously from home because our governor has urged all of us that can telecommute to please do so. And so I'll go into the office once or twice a week. But, you know, I don't have any lunch appointments, no more cocktail parties or dinners. And that typically for me, when I'm here in Richmond, is 6 or 7 nights a week. And I'm often eating 2 lunches a day with donors, and that has not happened now for nearly 5 full months.
Yeah, let me just quote one of the commenters here. VMFA is wonderful. We miss our events at the museum, definitely an active part of Richmond community. So there are lots of comments rolling in praising your events and your active programs. So yeah, so I do understand that people are really miss the actual physical programs, because you can do everything online, but in a way it's not the real thing.
Yeah.
Okay, a little more serious thing related to this COVID crisis. I have read that every third art museum might close for good in the US due to the losses generated by the COVID and the lockdown. And also that, for example, the Philadelphia Museum of Art had to lay a great number of employees off. What is the background to that, besides the obvious answer? Is it only due to the financial difficulties caused by the economic crisis and the coronavirus, or are we maybe losing a part of the museum-going audience as well?
You know, luckily, I don't think it's the latter. Obviously, the coronavirus is keeping many people away for fear. But when the vaccine comes, and I'm confident it will, but probably not until 21 sometime or late 21, but sometime. But it is, and it's, for us, it's not contributed income. We operate on a budget of almost $50 million a year. And 1/4 of our budget comes from the Commonwealth of Virginia, the state government. We're an agency. 1/4 of our money comes from our endowment, and that's invested into the markets, and the markets have all rebounded. 1/4 of our income comes from contributed income. And people are being more generous today than ever before, because they realize, and here's where the bad news comes in, is that 1/4 of our income comes through earned revenues, ticket revenues for the special exhibitions, our gift shop sales, our restaurant sales, our cafe sales, and then for us, special events where companies and individuals, wedding parties, rent the museum, parts of the museum when we're closed, or parts of the museum when we're open, because we have plenty of entertainment spaces. There's been no income in those areas since March. And for us, you're talking a $10 to $15 million a year difference overall, that's been hurt. We have no special events scheduled. And our situation is actually better than, say, the Metropolitan. 45% of all their visitors are foreign tourists who get off of airplanes and go to the museum and pay $25 to go into the museum. We don't have that many foreign tourists in Richmond, Virginia, and we're free. So our revenue issues are considerably smaller in scope. Nonetheless, and you look at the big city museums where they aren't insulated the way we are and have such balance in terms of support, and it is virtually catastrophic. And the longer we go on without a vaccine, the more museums of all sizes will suffer. Now, the statistic about the 1/3 will close, my perspective on that is that those are small art museums which have very much a reliance entirely on earned income. And if it's zero, and they normally get 70 or 80% of their money from that, they have no choice but to close. And many of them have closed because of the coronavirus, and they will likely not open again.
This is a very, very sad story. And I wonder, will the consequences of this virus like this change the museums as we know them now? So can new art institutions respond successfully to the lockdown situation, and not only to the lockdown, but also to the economical consequences? For example, I can think of, focusing more on digital art or art that can be displayed online. So do you have something in mind if this thing lasts for longer than we expected?
Well, I can tell you that we've always had digital programs, online lectures and programs, and class opportunities and everything, tons of them. Very few people generally have taken advantage of them, except since March. And people have discovered that we have this rich array of programming, all of it for the most part free. And so we had a lecture the other day by our curator of ancient Mediterranean art, who is overseeing the big exhibition from Cairo. And he had more than 1,000 people attend his lecture. Our theater only holds 500 people. So under normal circumstances, we would have been able to bring only 500 people in. And he would have had to do 2 lectures maybe, but we had a huge crowd. And even yesterday we had for our upper level patrons, and this is for folks who give $1,000 or more a year, we had 200 some odd people attend a program that we do weekly with one of our curators called Cocktails with Curators. And one of our brilliant European curators was doing a lecture about the printmaker Frank Short, and it was interesting. It was entertaining. It captivated everybody. But that's not going to go away. We've captured an audience that before just didn't exist.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. That if it works out well, these two things can coexist together in the future. I mean, like physical going to the museum and going to the programs that you organize, and also the online version, because I think it's so good that you can provide contents to people who cannot reach you. For example, I could attend some of your programs from Hungary if I wanted to, which would be a great progress, I think. What do you think about, it's a little futuristic, but how does a post-pandemic super safe art museum looks like? So if this pandemic thing lasts for a longer time, and when we have to keep ourselves to the regulations of safety, what changes do you have to make? What do you think? For example, yeah.
We've already done all of our protocols for safety and hygiene, and do a very good job. Everybody right now has to wear a mask. All employees, all visitors. You know, we do extra sanitations of all surfaces. You know, we have been very careful to create the safest, most hygienic environment possible. And I have to say that you know, that is a huge part of it. Once there's a vaccine, you know, we will likely not have to wear masks anymore, but all of the other protocols will probably stay in place as they should, and we will be just better for it.
Okay. Well, no doubt that the pandemic and its economic consequences cause difficulties and affect the future of our community, and especially museums. But there must be ways to react and to most possibly make the best of these situations. Think, in what ways can a museum help artists and other members of the art community? And what role should an art museum like the VMFA play in these challenging times?
Well, we've actually focused on this a lot. So our chief curator, Michael Taylor, and his curatorial folks in the contemporary and modern department have gone out to galleries here in Richmond, but in particular here in Virginia, but elsewhere, to purchase works of art by artists. Artists in America, probably elsewhere, have been hit the hardest in the economy because the galleries are closed. People are not going out to look at art. They're not going to studios. And so their incomes have dropped by something like 90%. So we're spending money and buying works from contemporary artists, even at a higher rate than we've ever done before. And in our case, focusing on African-American art, among other things. But I'm also happy to tell you that we give more money to working artists than any other art museum in the United States. And that's thanks to an endowment that John Lee Pratt, who lived in a city called Fredericksburg, north of us, gave us in 1941. And we set up an endowment. And so we give about $250,000 a year to artists working and living in Virginia. And these fellowships have no strings. They compete. We'll give out, say, 30 grants at fellowships, and we'll have 700, 800, 900 people apply. And many of them could win, but it's a very difficult competition. Now, we happen to have excess monies that when the pandemic hit, we looked at what can we do now? And so yesterday, I signed 40 letters. And the artists don't know it yet. The express mail packages are going out today. So tomorrow on Friday, 40 artists in Virginia are going to receive a letter from the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts that congratulates them, because there were almost 400 applicants from artists working in Virginia who've been hurt by the pandemic. Their income has dropped to zero in many cases. They have no way to support their family, no way to pay rent, no way to pay the utility bill, and they're using credit cards and loans from family members, or going without. So we're giving each of those a grant of $5,000, $200,000 of money being put into the economy. On the 24th of August, the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, and the First Lady will be making a public announcement here at which we're inviting all of the artists. And it's a way that we're helping very directly to help artists that need to make ends meet in this case.
Oh, that sounds wonderful, really. So you're really doing what you can do and what you have in your resources, and you're lucky, I think, museum. But what if I said that you have limitless resources, also all the money that you can have, and you could reach out to other communities like all over the world, wherever you want. Is there anything special that you would spend money now to save artists or somehow restart the art world? Who would you
Well,
start?
first of all, I'd encourage everybody to buy art. You know, I'm always amazed by people who say, "Oh, I can't afford that." And I'm talking about, for example, a lawyer or a business person who makes a lot of money, and they'll buy a beautiful new Lexus or a Cadillac or a Mercedes. Yet then they look at a work of art for $5,000 or $2,000 or $10,000, and they say, "Oh, I can't afford that." Everybody can afford art. When I was growing up, I bought art for a few dollars from friends. When I was very poor, working my way through graduate school, I would buy art from my friends by giving them money every month until I paid it off. And it doesn't have to be expensive, but people should come to the Art Market Budapest. I mean, you've got great artists, many of whom are lesser known now, and so the prices are considerably less than someday down the road when they're discovered by the art market as a whole. And as you mentioned with the photography end, boy, there are some great photographers that are seen at the Art Market Budapest. The dealers there come from not just Hungary, but from around Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, but lots of ways to see and enjoy. And the best way to do it is to buy art, because that's money directly into the pockets of artists and their galleries. And the galleries are hurting too. You know, we do a fair amount of business with galleries in Budapest, and I keep trying to find more things to buy because they're suffering in a similar way.
Yeah, true. And thank you for this message. I think it's really understandable for everyone. So this is what everyone in their strength what can do. A little on the reverse. So this is how we can help artists. A museum can help artists, and an art fair can help artists and the art community. But what do you think? And this might be a little kind of a more emotional question. That how can art contribute to the welfare of society in these difficult times?
Mm.
It help us to be in better moods, to find a better solution.
Well, I'll tell you, when we reopened on the 4th of July, our Independence Day, we had people come to the museum that hadn't been there in 3.5 months. And we had people cry. And we still have people coming in and crying. And people just find solace and peace and beauty in the artwork, and they learn. It's about that exploration and about being able to get away from all of the ills and troubles of the world. In our case, for example, we have two exhibitions of major proportions up right now. This exhibition of ancient art from Egypt, two cities that were buried under the Mediterranean for 2,000 years. All of the work done by underwater archaeologists, 300 objects from a couple of thousand years of ancient Egyptian history, and you're faced with this timeless beauty by going to see the exhibition. Another exhibition that was curated by one of our contemporary curators, Sarah Eckhart, on a group in New York called the Kamoinge. And these were Black American photographers, or are, because they're still working, many of them. It started in 1963, banded together. And so we have an exhibition that's traveling. It'll go to the Whitney, New York, in New York. It'll go to the Getty in Los Angeles. An exhibition of 180 photographs by Black photographers who, until a few years ago, when we started getting deep into this, were virtually unknown in most cases. And as a result, they're now being bought by collectors and museums across this country and for that matter across the world, where that wasn't happening before. So it is about that personal peace and solace, but it's also about learning and exploration and opening your eyes to one of the things that I have to say is so much overlooked and not revered enough. And quite simply, that's the notion of beauty and finding beauty in art. And in our case, across the last 5 or 6 thousand years, from across the globe, and whether it's Africa, the Middle East, China, India, we by the way, I forgot to mention one of the great collections of Himalayan art and Asian Indian art in North America. And our Himalayan collections are in the top 2 or 3 in all of the United States.
Okay. Before I go on to another topic, I have a last question related to this coronavirus issue. If we step a little further away from art museums and art institutions themselves, and we try to see generally over the American art market now, or the art market worldwide, what do you anticipate, say, in a year? Where would we be? What do you think? What would happen in the market?
Well, you know, the auction houses are successfully going online to do their sales and seeing very robust sales, which I think is extraordinary. And I think it's part of the change that will be permanent. People will travel less to see auctions. I think art fairs will be still a mainstay, although probably few in number. The real worry, though, is about galleries. And whether it's here in Richmond or New York or Washington, Paris, Budapest, a number of galleries, just like art museums, will close and close permanently. And that's going to be a real loss because it's impacting 2 groups, the galleries themselves, but especially all the artists if they're working with contemporary art. And if they're not, they're going to be in the secondary market. And, you know, if it's 19th century European painting, you know, they're buying those works and then selling them. And by missing that piece of the market, it's going to hurt everybody. And that's long term. We'll see some recovery, but I think over the next 12 to 24 months, it's going to be fairly severe.
Yeah, difficult. Yes. Well, let's move on to another similarly interesting subject and also a little severe, I think, that is currently in the headlines all over the world. The social movement, Black Lives Matter. It used to be an American issue until a few months ago when it gained international attention. We hear about it all day. Richmond, home to the VMFA Museum, has a very interesting history, having been the capital of the Confederacy in the Civil War back there, but later becoming a real hub of the African-American culture as well. How does the people, the society in your city react to the demonstrations, to the movement itself?
Well, you know, by and large, first of all, we're big supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement, but more so in a larger context. You look at Virginia. Yes, we were the capital of the Confederacy from 1861 to 1865, but it's the terrible legacy of how people with their origins in Africa have been treated in this country, but for that matter, and the reason this has become global, around the world. You know, Europe and America went into Africa and enslaved millions and millions of people who were doing nobody harm, and were only enslaved because it was easy and profitable. The first Black enslaved people to come to English North America came to Virginia in 1619. So we have 401 years of this terrible history, and the history did not get any better in 1865 when the Civil War ended. Although slavery officially ended, the fact is that Black people in America have been oppressed. And you look at the statistics of economics, of affluence and education, and through very, very overt and covert, many of them laws promulgated by our federal government and our state governments and our local governments, pushed to make sure that Black people would not advance economically or otherwise in this country. Now, we've made a lot of headway in the last 50 years, but we have so much further to go. And for us, that legacy is twofold: building our collections of African art, which also I should note are among the best in America today, and quite frankly, with collections that we're working on to build, a couple of collections that we hope come to us from European collectors, that will be one of the very best collections of African art in the world. And then the African American art, which we will, if we aren't already there, be one of the three best anywhere on the planet. Now, that being said, our city, like many cities across America, has seen social unrest. Now, for the most part, there's certainly been some, violence, looting, and things, but that's not the Black Lives Matter people. Those are people who are taking advantage of the conflict, of the protests, and are causing harm, are stealing. But they're not Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter it's a peaceful movement, and its sole purpose is about providing all people, particularly in this case African Americans, the same kinds of opportunities and equalities and inclusion that people with white skin already have just by the nature they're born with that privilege.
Yeah. Do you think an art institution, any kind of institution, but in our case, an art institution like VMFA, should take any position on in a social and political issues like this? I mean, this was your personal opinion, which is absolutely valid. But in case of an art museum, how do you express it in a way, or you just operate in a normal way during these times?
Well, just by the mere fact that we say, and we are, a collection that is building to be one of the best collections of African American art in the world, we already make a lot of people angry, or at least some, maybe not a lot anymore. That by its nature is inflammatory, because there are people, racists, who want to work against equality. And they look at an institution like ours and say, why are you collecting that? Why are you exhibiting that? And then they look at the institution overall. My senior management team, including myself, there are 8 of us. 5 of the 8 are either people of color or significantly people of color, including 3 Black women. And, you look across the landscape of art institutions, and that doesn't happen often enough, and it needs to change. It needs to be better, because what we find are great talent, because we cast the net further to be able to find the smartest, the best, most competent people with the best experience. And it's incumbent upon art institutions who have been complicit in this problem to do better. And the same thing's true, by the way, of our managers, our directors, our department heads. 40% of all of our managers and department heads are people of color, most of them African American. And if you go back 15 years ago, we were, like most art museums in America, lily white from the top to the bottom. And many institutions, all you ever see in terms of people of color traditionally are people who are custodians and guards. And that, of course, is the lowest economic end, which is wrong. And so should we, and are we officially? We are, because as an institution, our board of trustees, which is appointed by the governor, and our governor have espoused the doctrine of inclusion, equality for all people. When the United States was formed in 1776, and it talked about, creating a country that is equal for everyone, it only meant white men. It did not mean women. So there's half the population there. And it did not mean what was then a quarter of the population of the colonies, people of African descent. And that by itself is wrong. And so we've been spending hundreds of years of oppression, and now it's time to step up the part that we all need to do. And art museums should not be exempt. In fact, if anything, we need to be leaders. You know, showcase the great heritage that Africa has provided for the world in terms of beautiful and inspiring art. Showcase the works by African American artists who have been working for hundreds and hundreds of years in this country, but without recognition and without the kind of acclaim that they all have deserved. And across our curatorial ranks, everybody's committed to that. Our chief curator, our contemporary curators, our American curators, all of us. And it's important that we do this because, you know, all people are created equal, but we need to make that a reality. And where better to start than art? Because art is created by human beings from an inner inspiration. And having that variety of cultural heritage and sources of inspiration is what makes us so much better on every level.
Thank you for that. I think it was very important for us to understand a little better the situation, what's going on over there, because from here it's not so obvious, but it's really, I just really want to show the audience very quickly a lovely sculpture. I think it has a lovely story, if you let me. This is called Rumors of War by Kehinde Wiley. I show it in a little pig. Alex, can you explain us a little just the background of this sculpture? Because I think it's a very symbolic thing what you have, and it's a relatively new acquisition. So what is it about?
Well, let me tell you a quick background of Kehinde Wiley, the artist. He was born in Brooklyn, an American, obviously, who, as a painter, first of all, classically trained, graduate degree from Yale. He's African American, and with his classical training, he decided to change how he painted by taking traditional paintings like by Jacques-Louis David of Napoleon crossing the Alps. But instead of Napoleon on the horse, and we're talking a painting that's 12 feet by 16 feet, he puts a young African-American male in the seat of the horse. So 4 years ago, the Brooklyn Museum mounted an exhibition, a survey of Kehinde's career. And I'll say this, Kehinde has become probably the most famous artist on the planet. He painted President Obama's official portrait. And the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. doubled their attendance from 1 million visitors to 2 million visitors on the sole reason that people were coming to see Kehinde Wiley's portrait of President Obama. And so Kehinde comes to Richmond, Virginia for the exhibition. He had never been here before and experienced an avenue only a few blocks from the museum called Monument Avenue. And on that avenue were 5 major sculptures, including an equestrian sculpture of a Confederate general by the name of Jeb Stuart, J-E-B Stuart. And the sculpture is now gone. It's been removed by the city of Richmond, sat on a pedestal 16 feet tall. So if you're looking at that slide, that pedestal is 16 feet tall. And then the sculpture from the base of the sculpture to the top of the man in the horse, another 13 feet in bronze. And this was of a Confederate general. And this was, by the way, like the other generals, erected in the late 19th and early 20th century by descendants of people who fought the Civil War. But the purpose was much more nefarious. These sculptures were established and erected to make Black people in Richmond and the South and everywhere they were to be afraid of the dominant white society. And so they sit with these noble postures atop these noble steeds to scare and keep Black people, so-called, in their place, meaning they did not want them to advance. Well, fast forward, Kehinde sees this, he's inspired, And about now 2 years ago, we were at the Gordon Parks Award ceremony in New York. Kahindi was receiving an award. It's a big, prestigious national award for the artist, and as well as Sally Mann, a photographer from Lexington, Virginia, who is world renowned. And so we were there for Kahindi and for Sally. And Kahindi came up and said, "I've got this idea." And he sent us some images that he'd done drawings, and they did some computer generated modeling that shows you what you see here on the screen. This taking exactly the proportions, the pose, everything, but instead of General Stewart, it puts a young black man in contemporary urban garb. He's wearing blue jeans. They got a tear in the knee. He's got dreadlocks. He's wearing a hoodie. And it is about changing the dialogue about who gets to be in the nobility, who gets to be atop a horse in this proud and dramatic fashion. So instead of a dead Confederate general, who, quite frankly, those were treasonous soldiers who fought against the United States, but instead you have a young black man in America, going back to the Black Lives Matters movement, recognizing the fact that young black men are more likely to die and be shot and killed by police than young white men in America by something like a 9-to-1 margin. And so when Kahindi presented that to us, we had no choice but to say, Kahindi, go with it. And so we commissioned the sculpture. It was installed in Times Square in September, New York City, to tens of millions of people for a couple of months, and then came down to Richmond and was installed in December, and is now proudly at the very entrance. Where this picture is being taken from is Arthur Ashe Boulevard. Arthur Ashe being the world famous tennis star, who was the first African American to win major Grand Slam prizes in the world of tennis, was from Richmond, Virginia. But when he grew up in Richmond, he couldn't even go to the public tennis courts in the city because they were segregated and black people were not allowed. So we commissioned sculpture because it changes the dialogue about the position of young black men in America. It helps to use a beautiful work of art that is inspired by a work that's quite darker in its history, that of a Confederate general, which, by the way, now is gone. So we have one of the few remaining monumental sculptures. There is a sculpture of Arthur Ashe on Monument Avenue that is staying right where it is.
Thank you for that explanation. I think it is a very exciting story. This sculpture, it's amazing. Well, towards the end of our conversation, I'd like to mention our ongoing partnership between the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts and Art Market Budapest. You visited the fair not only as a guest, but also as a speaker in a panel discussion at Inside Art conference back in 2018, I think. I actually have a proof here, so I'm going to show our audience that you were here. Yes, so you're there. Yes, that happened 2 years ago, actually. Yes, looking at it from the US, how do you view the importance of an art fair like Art Market Budapest? What was your experience when you visited us?
Well, first year I came, I was startled because I saw so many artists I didn't know and never seen before, and that's what makes art fairs valuable, is you can see so many good dealers all at once, and the fair is put together with great expertise, beautifully laid out in a central part on the Buda side in Budapest, and a great fair in terms of quality, and we have here at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts bought a number of works of art from dealers, primarily photographs, but that's an area that, of course, with the show that I'm working on, we're specializing in. But it's a beautifully done fair, and I have to say I've invited all of my colleagues in America to join me each year because it's an undiscovered gem. It's one of the best kept secrets, certainly in America. And it opens up the door and the eyes for people to see art that, quite frankly, they probably won't see otherwise.
Okay. And what do you think are the benefits of a collaboration between an art fair and an art museum, and particularly between Art Market Budapest and the VMFA?
Well, I tell you what, you and Attila and all the others have done a great job of connecting us up with dealers and collectors, as a matter of fact, because we've also made connections with collectors of Hungarian American photography, but also a connection to the museums in Budapest and across Hungary, and people like Carolee, who has made what we're doing better and more productive than it might have been otherwise by a large margin.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Well, I could go on asking lots of questions and for hours and hours because it's very exciting. But on the one hand, we don't want to keep you up, and also our time is slowly over too. So thank you very much, Alex, for this. It was really, really inspiring and very informative. I expect you can travel shortly, and we can see you in Budapest sometime.
I hope sooner than later. I have tons of cousins who live in Budapest. In fact, all of the Hungarian side of my family, except for 2 cousins in this country, live there, and I love to visit all of my family. And of course, every time I do, oh my gosh, I have to not eat for days after coming home.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Alex. Then.
Thank you, Christina.
Bye. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed Inside Art Live with Alex Nyerges. We will be back in about a fortnight with Mr. Csaba Kál, and I will show you. Yes, so we will be back in about a fortnight with Mr. Csaba Kál, the CEO of MUPA and the chairman of the operative board of the Budapest Spring Festival and the Café Festival. This episode will be in Hungarian and will be hosted by Attila Ledényi, founding director of Art Market Budapest. Please check back to our Facebook for the exact date, and which will be announced in the next few days. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Bye-bye.